I'm Andrew Edlin, and I'm really excited about our talk this evening. Big thanks to the new museum for having us and to our fair staff, especially Monica Skelly for helping organize this, and of course our director, Sophia Lanús. I want to briefly tell you how this panel came together because I think it's kind of fun. 2 summers ago, my Aunt Linda called me excitedly that her book club read a fabulous novel called The Latecomer, which contained an important scene that took place at the Outsider Art Fair. So I soon picked up a copy and dug in. It turns out there was another scene at a Henry Darger opening at the American Folk Art Museum. More importantly, I'd stumbled onto a great work of American fiction, and one with a thread running through it that was of great interest to me, namely the differences between a self-taught DIY approach to making art and even living life versus one shaped by a more formal academic education. As I read the acknowledgments at the end of the book, out of Jean's book, I saw a familiar name, an old high school friend and a well-known documentary filmmaker named Lynn Novick. Lynn, I emailed, "How do you know Jean?" "She's my cousin." "Cool. You think she might like to be on a panel?" Forward to last spring. I'm listening to Mark Maron's podcast, WTF. He's got Warren Zanes on. Not only had I devoured his biography of Tom Petty, but I knew his legendary band, the Del Fuegos, back in the 80s when I was trying to make it with my own band in Boston. He was plugging Deliver Me From Nowhere, his new book about the making of Bruce Springsteen's Nebraska album, which was always my favorite of his. You see, around 1981, Bruce started making demos on a 4-track cassette recorder, ostensibly to show the E Street Band new songs for what would be their follow-up album to The River, which had been a huge hit. But it turned out that when these intimate songs were blown up into something produced to more typical industry standards, the souls of the characters were lost. Warren went on to explain that the imperfections of the homemade recording, from the hiss on the tape to the small flubs, were where the humanity and vulnerability of the artist shone through. Well, it sounded to me like he was talking a little bit about outsider art. So I went online, I found his website, I told him who I was, and that I already had this great novelist on board. He answered in minutes, "I'm in a band with her husband and just wrote a song based on The Latecomer, so count me in." So it kind of seems like fate, right? And as for getting David to join, all right, there was a little begging and pleading involved, but not so much. David attends the fair every year and has played an important role in helping outsider artists gain recognition. Through supporting organizations like Creative Growth, through his collecting, and his putting a Howard Finster on the cover of Talking Heads' Little Creatures album in 1986. Even better, having his voice on this panel completes a lineup of creative thinkers who are not the art world's usual suspects. And as for Carlo McCormick, I asked him to moderate for one simple reason. He's the smartest guy I know. But now I want to throw you guys a little curveball, because for your listening and visual pleasure, I'm really excited to introduce one of my favorite artists who has generously agreed to perform for us tonight. Please give a warm welcome to Brent Green.
Thank you. I hear outside. Too late to hear anything outside, really, except crickets and frogs and, I guess, weather. I hear footsteps, stomping around, an awful lot of footsteps. Outside the window, the world is on fire. We trust each other with each other to a staggering degree, but hold ourselves at arm's length, deaf to everything. I can find the words but can't shape them to a song. Don't compromise your ideas and beliefs, but beware your ideas and beliefs may be wrong. I check on my children. We talk about simple things. Is there a drop of water in the ocean that's never been rain, never been frozen? Did George Washington drink any of the water that's now in that mosquito pond behind our house? Is that why he died? I want them to believe there's some golden glow behind the stark barrenness of life. That's where music comes from. I crawl in bed with my wife and hold you close. I hold you close. I hold you close like some idiot doctor who just loves the sound of your heart and lungs. I am the colored scraps of fabric swept into a pile on your tailor's floor. You are so beautiful. A truck of blood delivered to the war. A wall made of hammers when we run out of boards, with cathedral glass stole right from Rome. Someone someday will notice all those windows are gone. I'd hold you close. I'd hold you close. I'd hold you close. But oh, how I love the sound of your heart. Oh, how I love the sound of your heart. Hey. All right, thank you all.
I guess some thanks first to Andrew and his great staff at the Outsider Art Fair, the new museum, for letting us do this, because aren't they closed now? Like everything in New York, like it's gonna get bigger and shinier and something like that. But anyway, you can tell people you were here when right next to it was a hole in the ground, which will, I guess, be part of the museum soon, right? And thanks for everyone for coming. But mostly, I've really got to thank the three people up here with me. Gene, Hanff Korelitz. These triple-barreled names kill me. Warren Zanes and David Byrne. What we sent them was like a half-baked, misshapen idea, and they somehow agreed. And I'm not sure I can be much more articulate about it now. But what we were trying to get at, and hopefully we'll get somewhere close to there, is instead of having people always talk about the outsider as a kind of set personality or place in our culture, to talk about it as something more like a gaze, like it's about our perception of the outsider. And that's why I'm kind of really thrilled to have these people here. I'm going to start with you, Gene, because Your book has, as Andrew explained to us, it has these elements of, it has an outsider art fair scene, it has a scene at the Folk Art Museum, it has two prominent outsider artists in there, but really, you're just a maestro at weaving really complex storylines. Like, I'd give you a spoiler alert, but your plots are so densely, they're really wonderful. So I can't even break it down for you, but these things are really central yet marginal to the book. So I'm going to ask everyone basically what they like about outsider art. So maybe you can address it for the writing of this book.
Yeah, well, I should start by saying that this isn't really my world, the art world, even the outsider art world. I'm coming from a place of the written word, but, and I brought this, I actually went and found this morning in anticipation of tonight. This magazine arrived in my house in New Jersey in 1997. I still have no idea why. I mean, did I sign something? I don't know. But it arrived, and the cover, this was my first sight of Achilles Rizzoli, and a transformative experience it was. I read about this outsider artist. It was, again, from my outsider perspective, the dawn of the outsider art world. There were two artists that people seem to know about. One was Achilles Rizzoli, and the other was Henry Darger. And within a few years, Darger had sort of supernovaed everybody else out of existence. And so when it came time to create an outsider artist for this novel, I was going to make one up. And then I thought, no, I love this guy, and I want more people to know about him, and I'm just going to insert him into this book. And it's very gratifying to me that people, come to me and say, well, I never heard of him. I mean, I've heard of Henry Darger, but I've never heard of Achilles Rizzoli, and now they've learned more about him. And so my work here is done. So I'm very happy about it. Okay.
Yeah, well, we'll follow up more on that later then. Warren, do you mind going next?
Fine with that.
It's a remarkable book, the one you did on Springsteen's Nebraska. Made nearly a convert out of me. What's so great is you talk about...
I'm not going to use that as a blurb.
Yeah. Sorry. No, but you take all its flaws, all its you understand how everything that is just slightly kind of off register with this is something more honest and more authentic. And while you tell that story, which you can do because you actually can technically talk about music in ways that people like me just fake it, you also bring in like these dark voices and the mental health issues and all this stuff like that. So it's a much denser package than your average book about a rock record, right? Can you talk a little bit about...
Yeah, well, yeah, thank you for that. How many people know Bruce Springsteen's Nebraska record? Just curious. Okay, so, I mean, it's the only record he made and released not knowing he was making a record. So he thought he was making demos in his bedroom. And he was doing it on a 4-track recorder that used just cassette tapes that you could get at CVS. And the idea was that he had been spending too much money in the studio, so he wanted to save money by, with 4 tracks, he could begin to arrange something, where what he'd been doing up to that point was he'd been basically writing in the studio. And it's very costly to go into a commercial studio and take that approach. And the record company stops paying at a certain point, you go out of pocket. So he found there he was in his early 30s without a whole lot of money despite his success. And so he buys this 4-track recorder. And he's living very close to his hometown, close to the home where he lived with his grandparents, which was colored by the death of his aunt at 6 years old. So he moved into his grandparents' home, which was like a place that was frozen in incomplete mourning. And he says that, his grandparents' response to him as the first grandchild was to withhold discipline. And so here's this kid, from like 1 to 6, who can stay up as late as he wants, do whatever he wants. And he, in his own words, he said, "It made me and it destroyed me." And in making Nebraska, that was the past that he was going back to. So there he is in his bedroom, kind of unknowingly going to a past that has some trauma in it, but also putting down recordings. And I'm not going to use the word authentic. I think it's a little bit of a dangerous one, but he felt unwatched. Yeah. He felt invisible. So here's a guy, this ended up being record number 6. It just had his first #1 record. It had his first top 10 single with Hungry Heart. And then he made this record, not knowing he was making it, and was compelled to release it. And it confused the fuck out of his fans. It made his record company, they could, at that point, he was Bruce Springsteen. So they're not going to say no, but they sure didn't want this record. And that's what drew me at first. So far be it from me to call Bruce Springsteen an outsider artist. But I think when we allow the outsider category to be more elastic and don't think of it in terms of the biography of the person or the character of the art, but a kind of outsider moment for someone like Bruce Springsteen, who was, very much inside Columbia Records, top of the charts. And he made this artistic decision that kind of, in a provisional way and in a temporary way, put him outside of his own inside. So, again, I think it's such a contested term, the outsider. But I think, whether it's Emily Dickinson or it's Bob Pollard and Guided by Voices, I think people have these moments that don't make them outsider artists, but they're kind of leaning in that direction. And something happens that otherwise couldn't, and that's Nebraska.
Yeah, and we'll get into some of the outsider voices he channels in this record. But I want to get to you, David. Andrew, I think, given enough of your pedigree in the outsider art world as kind of a patron with creative growth and the Howard Finster record cover and things like that, I'd also kind of like to thank the record label, Luakabop, and like someone like Willie Ani Erber, am I saying that name right? Which is kind of like really outside. For me, right? So I think you have this sensitivity and this aesthetic that goes through it. So he's going to answer that rambling question, and then David's going to give us a little presentation because he's been thinking about this. So
the question talking to a microphone, and it's on. We're going to talk about our relationship to this kind of genre of art, if we can even call it that now. I went to a couple of art schools when I was younger. It might have been there, might have been before that or after that. It was somewhere around that time. This would have been in the early 70s. I became aware that there were all these artists who were outside of the mainstream. And what else was I aware of? I was aware that the Harry Hu group, these artists in Chicago, were also real fans of a lot of what became known as outsider art. I think there was a while when nobody knew what to call it. It was just like, here's a guy. We went into a guy's apartment and we found all this stuff. And he's been making it. And yeah. And there was a couple of galleries in New York that started showing some of this stuff, and I found it incredibly moving. And I got whatever books I could find about it. I found that the art really touched me. Some of the artists went to really dark places, and they still do. A lot of the artists go to really dark places in a way that I think maybe academically trained artists are sometimes afraid to do. It's because it exposes part of you that we don't feel comfortable kind of putting out there. Well, sometimes they put it out there. And I thought, I recognize some of that dark stuff they're putting out there in myself. I don't want to go there, but I recognize it, and it's comforting to see somebody else talk about it visually. That was one of the ways that it kind of connected. I connected to it, and have continued to do that.
Yeah, we were kind of laughing earlier about how when you go the Outsider Art Fair, all these artists who would never be caught dead at a regular art fair are all there, like eyes agog, mouth agape, kind of just like, wow, this is such good food. You kind of, in your obsessive mind, you kind of started thinking about what we might talk about, and you gathered some images and some thoughts together.
Yes, I did. I have to say, I got a little confused. And somehow I thought we were supposed to give talks or something. So I started putting something together. So I'm going to go to that. But and so rather than do the whole everything I've ever been thinking about on this kind of stuff, I've kind of narrowed it down to sort of one question, maybe one or two questions. It takes a while to get to the question, but
just like me that way.
Yeah. Oh, I'm going to move some of these instruments, this Foley stuff. It's okay, but I could make kind of creaking sounds as I talk. Okay. Oh, there we go. Okay, so one of the questions is sort of related to an even bigger question, which is, why do we make art? Why do we create? Why do we write? Why do we do these things? Why do we dress up? Why do we build buildings? Why do we make shows and perform and do all this stuff? Okay, so the traditional evolutionary explanation is that the bird of paradise, there is one of them. Let's see if we can go. Oh, there's another one. That they have what would be called burdensome ornamentation. It's not practical. You can't fly very well with all that stuff. But the traditional view is that these kinds of things, including the peacock's tail, are utilitarian, that they show the potential mate, oh, look, this guy, in many cases it's a guy, in many cases in this thing, it's the female who's deciding, is this guy worth it or not? And you look at the tail or you look at the bird of paradise and you go, he's put so much energy into that useless stuff. He must be really healthy to be able to do that, to be able to adapt to and be the kind of being that can be to do all this useless stuff. And well, the males do it too. The males grow bigger and bigger, kind of antlers and horns, and they sometimes in the male end of it is weaponry, like guns and rockets and planes and stuff. But in the animal world, it's big horns. Yes. That's not making art yet, but it's getting there. But it's all about, in this traditional view, it's all about trying to find a mate. And so I went online, and this says that to a woman, this is what the internet claims, to a woman, this guy is more desirable than that guy. I can't explain it, but that's what the internet says. And vice versa, the internet will explain to us how a woman should dress to attract that guy, who's obviously, he's really got it all happening. Now we're going to get to making things, because so far it's just all about physical appearance. But the same idea extends to making things. And here's the nest of the bower of a bowerbird. I'm assuming that some of you have heard of bowerbirds. And Well, they do a lot of decorating. The male bowerbird collects all this stuff, and they have all different ones. This one is like a little cave, right? And puts all these, and if one little orange thing is out of place, he'll know. If you, the silly scientists will come in and move one and go, let's see if he notices. He notices, and he puts it back. So their artwork, if you want to call it that, they know what they're doing. They know exactly how they want it to look, and it's very considered. And sometimes, sometimes it works. Sometimes the lady appreciates what he has created. Sometimes there's a little bribery involved. Okay, so this raises the question of whether exhibiting skills at making things, making art, writing, doing all the things I talked about, if that grants you reproductive success. So Darwin himself, his next book after Origin of the Species was called The Descent of Man, and in that one he raised the idea of sexual selection. And sexual selection, he said, is usually the female, and it decides whether to go based mainly on beauty. This was not a popular idea for a couple of reasons. The idea that animals wouldn't have a utilitarian criteria, that they were just looking and go, this guy is beautiful, and he's got money, or he makes a beautiful bower and decorates it beautifully. I'm going with him. That they didn't like the idea of beauty, and they didn't like the idea, and I still don't, that it's the woman who decides. So there was a recent book by a guy named Richard Prum who says that, sorry, I'm going to another page. Sorry, I'm going as fast as I can here. Prum says that he's very much focuses on birds. He came out with a book called The Evolution of Beauty. It's highly recommended. He says birds are beautiful because they're beautiful to themselves. There's not a utilitarian value. They find other birds beautiful, and if it's the male who has the plumage, the woman, the female, adapts, evolves to appreciate what the male's doing. It's like a runaway thing. Then the male kind of ups it, raises the bar, grows bigger feathers and whatever, and she's going, I think I like that even better. So that keeps going. So I wondered if animals like the bowerbird and others that make things are like artists. And I wondered, how do artists do? This is Picabia's girlfriends. He's a notorious womanizer. And I wondered did these women all kind of decide, I'll have a fling with him because I really like his paintings. This is Goethe's girlfriends. He's a well-known author, right? Big personality. He was a big deal. So, reproductive success, so far so good. These are, Picasso's girlfriends. They, maybe less said about that, the better. But, he has a reputation. Dora Maar is the only one who said, fuck you. The rest of them just put up with it. You wonder about evolution sometimes. So then I wondered about what about people like me? What about people who, how do we display? How do we do that? And does that help us out? Is that like our art form here? I wonder. Here, and if you want to learn how to do it, you can learn all the poses. So there's all this reproductive success. Picasso, some rock stars, all this kind of stuff. You get there's presumably some reproductive success, although I only have one child, so I have not been paying attention to this. But, okay, so, but if that's all true, then what about, Henry Darger? There's his studio. And what about people, the artists, who never show their work, who don't crave that social acceptance, don't crave kind of women or men or whoever fawning over them? They do things in secret. That baffles me, and I'm seriously asking if anybody's got an answer to this question: why some artists do this? Because following all that evolutionary stuff, it doesn't make any sense. This is the collection of a guy named what's his name? Frank Johnson, who in his house they discovered 2,300 pages of comic books that he'd written. This is Goya. He did the black paintings in his house and never showed them to anybody. I mean, he had a few friends that came to visit, but he wasn't like trying to sell the idea and turn it into a house museum. Goya also did the Disasters of War series and another series of prints that he never even printed them. He did all the plates, got it all ready, and decided, better not. This stuff is a little too heavy. Now those are considered like some of the best things he ever did, but he never put them out to the public. Hilma, everybody knows Hilma now. This is a guy named Zebedee Armstrong, who had a vision in the early 70s about Revelation and the calendar, and that somehow by doing these kind of calendars, he could kind of figure out when the rapture was going to happen by making these calendar-like charts. And he kept those quiet too. Never put them out. You mentioned Rizzoli, this guy Rizzoli, and he did, some of these artists do try to make an attempt to have their stuff shown, right? But this is this amazing announcement that he made to show some of his work in his house, and it was a 10 cents admission.
Once a year, one day a year.
One day a year, and nobody came. He tried. So he tried, but a lot of them don't even try. So now I'm asking myself, this is the last part here, right? Now I'm just asking myself, what if we don't make art for those evolutionary reasons at all? What if we make it for the idea of beauty, the way the birds find birds beautiful because they're beautiful? But also, what if we make art as a way of understanding ourselves, the world, the universe, and our place in it? It's like our own, spiritual, psychological investigation. And it doesn't have to be thrown into the public as a commodity. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. That's where I got so far.
That was beautiful. Probably a lot to think of. Did anyone have an answer for why do we do things? Why would we choose to do something for no audience, like the tree in the forest kind of thing? Does anyone have an answer?
I have a potential answer. I mean, I do think that for most artists, connecting with an audience is essential. But if we never do, then we have a secret, and a secret is very powerful. So you didn't mention there's one guy, I think in Washington, who would come home after work and he made a whole city in his basement of bottle caps, I think. I mean, he had a city in his basement made of bottle caps. I mean, it was it must have been such a powerful thing. So that's some compensation for sharing your work with the world, but most of us want that connection.
And I won't ask Warren or David why they got in a band, because I think you've made that evident. But
It's all about plumage.
yeah, yours is beautiful, man. I guess I would. Where do you go from that? I guess what I'm curious about is also this nature of narrative that's going on here, and that all of you are kind of storytellers in your way. I remember from before Andrew had it, from the very first outsider art fairs, which were mind-blowing to me, but they used to be in the Puck building. Did have a great history as the Puck magazine, which was so radical. So we loved that it was there. And I'd go, and every booth was somebody telling you a story. Mm-hmm. This is this elderly Black grandmother of 52 people who talks to God and God tells her to do this or something like that. It was always this narrative. And I'm curious, because each of you have worked narrative. I don't know, David, maybe it's reaching out, but I'll just say like Psycho Killer. You did that. Yeah, if you're talking about Bruce's record, we have like a song where he's actually in the voice of Charles Starkweather, a serial killer, right? Mm. And then, Gene, in your book, I don't even, it's so, it's like an onion to peel, and I don't want to give away too much, but you have this ultra right-wing character who's representing something else and doing something in our culture called passing, and it's all these kind of weird narratives. So did I get to a question in that?
I can find a question. I'm not an autobiographical writer. I never have been. But this particular novel, which is my 8th novel, I have been told by people who do know me that reading this book is like taking a tour of the inside of my brain. And that's because I threw almost all of my personal obsessions into it. And they vary from right-wing politics to progressive education to outsider art to junk to hoarders. There's just a lot of stuff in this book. But, for me, I don't always know, and in fact, I seldom know when I begin where I'm going and if it's going to work. And I think that's actually really essential for a writer, to not know the outcome before you begin. I wonder if you would agree with that. With songwriting, you're both songwriters, how important it is not to know what the hell you're doing when you set out to do it. It's certainly true for fiction.
Yeah, there's a Donald Barthelme essay called Not Knowing, which is about this very thing. And so, yeah, there's the self-discovery element that's beyond the plumage. But I think most creators who are doing it for a number of years are probably overproducing. So there's a lot of work that actually won't meet the audience in order to find the work that will meet the audience. So actually the experience of being without an audience, I think, is common when viewed from that perspective. So when I'm working on a book that's under contract, I know that's what buys the meat and potatoes. And then I'm simultaneously writing songs, and I'm working on a memoir that my agent says, please don't ever bring me a memoir. But I'm doing those things, and they're giving me a lot, and they're completely without an audience. And so I'm sure I'm not alone in overproducing. And so I think it's not uncommon would be my point, but it's... for me, the marketplace will determine what I'm thinking of with an audience in mind.
Ooh, that's interesting.
David?
I have issues with all the biographies that are attached to outsider artists. As you said, it's fascinating. I mean, as you said, you go into a booth and you hear this incredible narrative about somebody who grew up and this happened and they lived here and they did this and they were, this is their situation. And then they started producing this incredible art. And somehow you start judging their art mixing it with the biography, and your appreciation of the art is somewhat connected with how bizarre or strange or troubled this person was. And I go, I love these stories, but I'm not sure I like that. Yeah. I'm not sure I want. I mean, prefer in an ideal world to just look at the art and go, that moves me. I don't know who this person was, and I don't care to know. This work moves me, but stories are really seductive too.
Yeah, they are, and it is strange because in the rest of art writing, we don't rely so heavily on biography. It's actually considered kind of a digressive thing that art should be able to speak for itself. But for outsider artists, we do have a way of speaking. Sorry,
I just wanted to chime in on that because I agree that sometimes the kind of fetishizing of the biography will cloud the work itself. Mm-hmm. But the other thing is, I think sometimes the category outsider art being so contested, I feel like when you go to MoMA, not so many people will say, that's not modernism. But when you go to an outsider art fair, you will hear, that's not outsider art. There's something about that empowered judgment that can also, I think, get in the way of looking at the artwork. And that's not to say it's not a legit contest, but sometimes it can get in the way.
Well, you brought up audience, and one of the things Andrew is interested in is that maybe there's this distinction, as David was limning with some of his stories about these people, is that that regular artists, as Gene says, wish to communicate with the world. It's a form of engagement and maybe of self-discovery, as you added, Warren, but that the outsider artist doesn't. So I don't know. I don't think that's a hard and fast rule. Certainly Howard Finster, who you put on your record cover, that guy was quite a self-promoter.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And he would invite people to come to his garden and see his stuff. And he would just churn it out and get it to people.
But there is this thing, and maybe Springsteen making a record not for an audience, but for himself or for his band to listen to. Freedom. So is the audience, is that the question you want me to ask?
Well,
I didn't know he was doing the moderating.
To use like Henry Dyer as an example, he made work and it was only discovered posthumously. Yeah. So to the extent we can never know how much he was thinking of an audience, but presumably he and so many artists who made work very hermetically without the audience being part of the equation, that has such an effect on the creativity and what the art, what it results in. And that, I think there's something there that compels us, because it's like it's not being made for the marketplace, or the dealer or the museum or the collector or the record buyer. It's someone I know made a very interesting analogy that he described outsider artists as trying to create a universe that they wish that they could live in themselves.
Yeah. Is that different from what each of you are doing? Aren't you doing something like that?
Well, I bet when the Kingsmen cut Louie Louie, they were thinking the same thing.
Yeah.
To create a better place to be, I'm sure, is behind much art that we consider insider art.
Well, that's about 5 levels more lofty than anything that I've ever been engaged with. My medium is language, and I have derived so much pleasure and happiness and power from the language of other people that my greatest dream is to do that for a reader. So for me, it's all about the connection.
But it's also like gauging how much an artist is thinking about audience. It would be very hard to arrive at a conclusive statement of that for anyone, even somebody who's deep in isolation. What is going on in their mind in terms of a projection of audience? And when you think of, of course, I love Scorsese's King of Comedy. He's down there in his basement and he's putting on that show for nobody, but boy, he's got an audience in mind.
Yeah. what I told Andrew when he said, "Oh, you should ask them that," I go, "Well, in all my experience of interviewing creative people, none of them like to talk about their audience, right? Like, because ultimately we are kind of trying to do things for ourselves, and that pandering to or being ratified by the response of an audience is sort of problematic. Or maybe I'm wrong about that.
Are we all doing it for our parents' love?
An outlier, then. An outsider, an outlier. I don't know. I mean, to me, it's all about the connection. I have no prayer of changing the world or world building in any other way. It's just the reader written word connection that's the high bar for me, and the low bar, all the bars.
That's part of the pathology of being a writer, I think.
It must be. I have no plumage, so there's no plumage involved at all.
When I put something out for public consumption, I want some people to like it. I don't make music or whatever it might be in ways that will push them away, that are difficult, make it difficult for them to find a way in. So I'll think of an audience in those terms. They're like, I don't want to put out any barriers to people enjoying the work or understanding it or whatever like that. But at the same time, I don't feel like I don't feel like I want to be pandering. So that if only 40 people really like it, that's kind of okay.
Yeah.
Can't make much of a living doing that, but it means that you've connected with those people.
Yeah, and I also kind of ascribe to the idea that, like, art is there to comfort the disturbed, but make the comfortable disturb themselves, to kind of work both sides of that. But that's probably just me, and I confess too much. Okay, so let's get around the audience question, and let's think of the outsider as this weird kind of secret topography within the body politic or something, and that it's just where a lot of things lurk. It's the privacy of Springsteen's tapes in that way, as you say. It's the way in which the collecting of the outsider art by this central patriarchal figure in your book is part of an affair and part of a secret life. I would say, I don't know, Dave, I keep throwing horrible references at you. You're like, Jesus Christ, this guy keeps talking about stuff I did 50 years ago. But I was thinking of My Life in the Bush of Ghosts, that record you did with Eno. And it's just like how those disembodied voices work in there as this kind of incredible magic. So I don't know if that makes any sense to y'all, but that was sort of what, if part of what we're looking at when it's about how we're looking at the outside, is that maybe it's like that kind of secret garden overgrown and back past the manicured lawn? You're looking at me like I'm nuts. Moving on.
Oh, I can think of, okay. I can think of that album you mentioned, the Bush of Ghosts record, and some others that I've done and some other things I've done where I go, I know ahead of time this is not going to be as popular as what I just did before. Kind of like the Springsteen record. I know it's not going to reach the same audience. It doesn't hit all those buttons. It doesn't do all that. But you have to do it anyway. And then I find, years go by, and you find that the audience that knows about those things and knows about the other stuff, they find an added depth. They find that there's more kind of more meat on the bone for them to get to, thanks to those kinds of things that didn't pander to the large audience.
I love the mystery of not knowing which thing is what it's going to do in the world. Mm-hmm. And like for me, the book that did the most for me in the world was the one that the sales were terrible.
Mine too.
Yeah. But to this day, it gives me things back that are entirely unexpected. So there is that conscious thinking about audience, but then there's the sheer mystery of you're sending these things out there, and they're gonna talk back to you from way away through some strange person who connects in a really unexpected way. And thank God for the unexpectedness of it and the mystery.
Yeah, I've had a very strange, almost old-fashioned writing career in that I published for many years books that very few people read, and then at the young age of like 59, I had a big book, and suddenly people were like, "Oh my God, where have you been all this time?" "Oh, I'm publishing books you didn't read." That's okay, but every now and then somebody will come up to me and say, "There's this book of yours that I always loved, and it came out years ago," and I know what they're going to say, and it means so much to me because nobody read that book, but it's my favorite, and it makes me really happy. The great thing about books, and I know this is the same for music, maybe all art, except maybe performance art, the book doesn't change. It hasn't changed a word since it was published. It is right where I left it. It is exactly as I left it, and it's new to you, as they say. So it's a really nice thing.
You've all had some careers of years now. Is that still possible, by the way, to kind of languish in semi-obscurity for
Very
decades?
difficult.
I don't think the industry can support
Very
that anymore,
difficult
right?
in the book world to be allowed to continue to publish without having had a great success. The only reason I managed it is because I am being held up by my agent and my editor who just saw me through and really believed in me. And I mean, I could not have done it without those two women.
Yeah, I think artist development's pretty much an anachronism in the music industry as well. But I don't know. I think I should allow some questions. Like, would that be? Are you guys all right with that?
Sure.
Yeah.
Plumage from
It's
out
bound
there.
to make more sense than my questions. Does anyone just want to stand up and scream, or should I get out there and Phil Donahue it?
Hi, people.
Oh, there we go. There's plenty.
Yeah, I don't have a question, but, when
Perfect.
we talk about the purpose of why people make art, I was the creative arts director at an AIDS day treatment program in Manhattan for 15 years. And a lot of the clients were people who had contemplated their mortality more than most of us do. And when they were prepared to perish, and then when the drug cocktails came in and they realized, oh, I have to live now. What am I going to do to reconstruct my life? Well, as the art director, the art guy, I said, well, you can make some art. And I supervised a music therapist, a dance therapist, a poet, a recreation therapist. And I said you could sing a song, you could dance a dance. And suddenly people started to realize, oh, I'm healing myself in a way by making art or doing one of these activities. Because I think art has this ability to kind of heal. I think we're all sick. And in a way, we all work to make ourselves whole and to be well. And I think that there is a therapeutic aspect to writing, and the artists that I've talked to are all doing private theater before it ever becomes public. So I think that's an important aspect to why people, to answer the question of why people in isolation or who don't even think of themselves as artists. And all I had to do was say, well, they would say, you're an artist, I'm not an artist. And I would say, no, I like what you're doing. And that was enough for them to continue. So I do think I like the idea of the uncultivated in the title, because I do think it takes cultivation. I think art has to be kind of held up and edified in a way, or else it tends to fade away or winds up in the dumpster.
That's where Rizzoli's work ended up, in the dumpster.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Thanks, Brett. You got next.
I think it's a human need. It's a basic human need to feel important, which is not the same as feeling narcissistic. We all need to feel that our lives have meaning. And I think one of the things that we have seen many times in these artists is a private need to redeem public obscurity. So this morning, as I was rereading the article, that there was this quote that I pulled out about Rizzoli. Through his drawings and writings, he escaped his reality as the shy, repressed, low-paid son of poor immigrants, becoming a collaborator with God, protege of the saints and companion to heroic figures from past and present. I mean, there you have it. I mean, that's why you go home at the end of the day and you build a city of bottle caps in your basement, because you're in conversation with celestial beings. And I've never had a conversation with a celestial being myself, but I completely understand.
Actually, I am one. I didn't want to let you know.
Okay, well, then tonight's the first. But that need to feel that, there's a purpose.
Cool. Cheryl, whatever.
David, do you have a favorite creative growth? Oh, sorry. David, do you have a favorite creative growth artist? And if so, what about that work moves you?
Creative Growth is a place in Oakland, California. They don't like to think of it as therapy, but it's kind of a workshop. People who are socially or challenged in different ways, they come in there and they were given art materials, and not all of them, but some of them do incredible work. God, I don't know, favorites. Everybody likes William Scott. I haven't seen anybody say, "Oh, that guy is so derivative." And there's Judith. What's it? Judith Scott. Judith Scott. She passed away, but she would wrap things, and you wonder, why is this moving? That she wrapped things, and she'd make these kind of things with all kinds of materials all wrapped around. And what do I find moving about that? I don't know, but I found it, as other people did, I found that incredibly moving.
And any other next question?
Gene, could you give us the name of the book that still gives you feedback or still gives you?
Yeah, it's called The White Rose. It came out in about 2002, I think, and it was a novel that I wrote after. No, it must have been 2004. I wrote after 9/11. When I was just incredibly sad, and I wanted to go back in time and write about people who were decent and good. So.
And Warren, you mentioned as well something that you produced but keeps giving you.
Yeah, it was the first book in the 33 1/3 series about Dusty Springfield's Dusty in Memphis album.
Hi, I hate to be a prototypical young person and ask about social media, but I think living in an age of social media and putting out, I hate the word content, but putting out content for consumption, especially as an outsider, you're either given that title or are adopting it yourself, and typically at the beginning you kind of resent that, and at some point that resentment turns into defiance, and that's the kind of motivating force that pushes you through. I'm wondering if you can all speak to a catalyzing moment in your careers that involved adopting the word outsider as a moniker of pride, and what you wanted to be rather than trying to insert yourself into a norm. And in the social media world where you're getting constant feedback, whether you're asking for it or not, how to prevail in that outsiderness.
I don't think any of us has adopted the term outsider for ourselves. Have you?
No. I mean,
I certainly felt a little bit separate from kind of a lot of normal people and a lot of rock stars, like the ones I had pictures of doing the poses and stuff. I thought, I'm not that.
And I was wondering if that guy in the suit with the X on him was a self-portrait. No. But I mean, David, we're kind of maybe a little similar generationally, that a lot of people kind of came to New York because they were outsiders in their community. We had a lot of friends who came here largely just because there was something as simple as they were queer, and that was going to get them in a lot of trouble in their hometown. But a lot of people came to New York for their difference, and I think a lot of people found commonality and community in a collective difference. So I think, we're not trying to, no one wants to misrepresent like as being like these outsiders, but I think we've all felt like alienation and disconnect and all those things like that.
But I do feel like when you get very elastic with the term, at the fringes of that, there are more people policing it, saying, you're not an outsider, you're not. That's why I was saying it's such an embattled category. To claim it for oneself would be very bold, I think.
I thought it referred to whether an artist had been taught within the academy. That was always the definition that I...
But like if you go to self-taught, then we were mentioning this earlier, all
musicians,
rock and roll,
right? Yeah.
Like, but...
And all writers. I mean, I don't care how many workshops you've been in. At some point, you have to teach yourself to do it.
Yeah, and you go too far with it, and I think it could be taken as almost an offense to those who were situated in the middle of the category. But I feel like there's a frailty when you get, not to get into, like talking about Derrida or something, but
go there.
But Derrida looks at binaries and inside, outside, and attacks them. But he's not there to say we can't use them. We need them to generate meaning. And I think you need to be critical when you start to establish inside, outside. That's one of the reasons it's so embattled and so fraught as a category, I think. To the original question about social media, and I have no answer for it. It's a looming question because there are so many off-the-grid creators working in social media. How do you begin to define an inside and an outside there? It gets very complicated.
Are there a lot of artists who post on social media but make no attempt to be in galleries and all this kind of thing?
Yeah. For sure.
What do you think of that?
Some of them are making big bucks.
Yeah, it's circumventing the system, which is all good.
I think maybe it's kind of related to your question, but I saw something recently about how there's that subcultures are disappearing and that they're being replaced by aesthetics for people my age and younger. And a lot of that is because of the internet, and that these spaces where people used to come together to make things don't exist anymore. They've been taken over by these internet spaces, but then it's this false reality. I guess I'm just wondering what you all think of that, and if you feel I don't know, if that's something that's actually happening, or I don't know. I guess I'm curious what your take is.
Well, we're all grumpy old men, right? So we hate this shit.
There's a rise in isolation. I mean, for sure. There's an underreported, mental health crisis connected to it. It's hard. I mean, I'm a parent. It's hard to feel cheery about it. But
Do you think there's sometimes when things get the worst, then there's an opening up, it's people are so fed up that they're all right, now it's time for me to create something totally new. I'm just wondering if you feel that there's any potential for that.
Glass half full, glass half empty.
It's the province of kids also. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that's, when you tell the kids there's no future, you get something kind of cool like punk rock.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, thinking of popular music, like the one thing that does give me heart is every time it starts to feel like it's getting static, something comes from the margins. It could be hip hop, it could be punk rock, it could be hillbilly music, it could be gospel entering into 50s R&B. Something comes from the margins that brings a new vitality. So while I can have a sense of foreboding about the future, that's happened so many times over in popular music that I have faith that that somewhere where we cannot see it, there is activity that's going to inform in some way the next stage of what happens. But yes, there is an incorporation that happens also. But that cyclical pattern gives me hope. I can't become an out-and-out pessimist because it keeps going down.
I can imagine that a lot of the whatever artists or creators who are posting on social media, that a lot of them have very little interest in the art world and galleries and museums and that whole system. They see themselves, I think, I'm guessing, as being outside of that and being, in some ways, more authentic than the big system that exists. That they feel like, yes, when I post, I'm posting directly to the people who are interested in what I do, and it doesn't go through any mediation. And they may think, okay, and if I can monetize it in some way, I'm doing great. I bypassed the whole thing.
Sounds good. To the end of Gatekeepers. I think is that about right for time? You know, do we have time for an encore? What do you think? One more question or not?
We're in good shape. It's, entirely. Yeah, we can have another question.
All right, let's do one last question. Make it a good one.
No pressure.
Okay. No, you've already went, Brent. You go ahead. You got to, yeah.
I'm looking at the two words, culture and uncultivated, and it seems like a lot of the last few questions are really rallying around just being heard, being noticed, being seen, whether it happened in the past or present or future. And I'm just curious, in all of your collective experiences, like, what do you think contributes to going from uncultivated, outsider, punk, hip hop, whatever you want to call it, to culture with a capital C? What do you feel contributes to that? You know, how did Kurt Cobain go from being like, you know, this person that came out of absolutely nowhere to, well, you know, he doesn't need an introduction, and that happens like across history, across culture, everywhere and anywhere at all points of time. You've lived more life than I have and accomplished an incredible amount of things. Would love to hear your thoughts.
They'll have more intelligent things to say than me, but I just want to say, since that was my ridiculous title, that I kind of borrowed this notion of uncultivated from this friend of ours who lives up in the mountains and makes a really cool hard fermented apple cider, but only out of wild apple trees. So trees that have like been around for hundreds of years, have, you know, there is no breed for them. It's not like a Macintosh or a delicious. They're just this gnarly fruit that's kind of responded entirely to its environment. It's just this tree that somehow could survive, like, it's in really unique ways. Like sometimes like growing between two rocks in an area which a lot of other stuff doesn't grow, and they produce this fruit. So that was like David turned into like a ornithologist in his thing, and I was thinking, you know, I guess, you know, people in the city, when we think of outsider, we think of getting out of town. So maybe that's what it is. But now you guys give your smart answers.
Okay, so my medium, as I've said before, is, well, specifically the novel. The novel is a new art form. It's called the novel because it was new in the 18th century, but it's still a young art form, and yet it has settled into a kind of traditionalism that is difficult to innovate. not widely, alarmingly. So, in other words, you can have a painting by someone who is not trained as a painter, and you can still see a lot of beauty in it. But if you sit down with a 300-page piece of really bad writing, you're not going to get far enough into it to be able to judge it as a novel. That's one of the inherent dangers, or not dangers, but challenges of my particular art form. So I feel like I have less of a capacity to, roll with the punches of innovation in my particular art form. I can look at, a Van Gogh, and I can look at, a Finster, and find them both beautiful, but I don't think I could do that within my own art form as freely.
Is the question kind of like, why do certain things get into the category of culture, capital C?
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to like make a general statement.
I don't know what the cheat code is, and not necessarily asking for that, but
I mean, I do think there are people who are slightly more obsessed than others. I think obsession is a big part of it. I worked at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame quite a while ago now, but I would do a lot of live interviews with artists. And I would structure the interviews looking at their careers before they got famous. I would stop at success because it made a better interview because it was stuff they didn't talk about. But what the takeaway for me was that I realized that all of these people were the ones who had the capacity to like dust themselves off and get back in the saddle more times than others. And that's why I got like, they're slightly more obsessed. And I think that's why you see a lot of artists who were indeed like trying to prove something to a parent or something. Like that can make people produce a lot of terrible stuff, and then eventually it can become good stuff, and then at some point they stop doing it to like crucify the father. But it's like endurance, fucking endurance. We talk a lot about talent and genius, but I think we fail to talk about that as much as we need to.
The persistence of vision. Sorry, David.
Yeah.
You asked about like how do things get to be culture with a capital C. I think I've been looking into this a lot, and there's of course all kinds of reasons why things don't get there: sexism, racism, religion, culture, politics. A critic who was very, very influential just killed it, and there was no way to recover. All sorts of things happen, but in the same way, the other side happens too. Something resonates with people at a certain moment, and it might be the moment when that person's alive, but it might be the moment 100 years after they're dead. Botticelli completely went out of favor. There was a religious fanatic named Savonarola, I think is his name, who basically crushed a lot of that kind of painting, and with some other people very influential, just basically wrote it out of the history books. It was like you could buy those paintings for peanuts. And now,
all right, thank you. That's the best last word.
I really want to thank everybody, David Byrne, Warren Zanes, Hanff Korelitz, and Carlo McCormick for a really fun panel. And thanks for coming, everyone. And we hope we see you at the Outsider Art Fair, which, as you know, is opening on Thursday. See ya.
Can I get a picture of you?